Hello there. Every now and then I get a guitar in with the deadest strings I've ever heard, and each time they're more deader than the next. Well, dead on the bass side anyway. Well, look, we've got the fabulous Fender Jaguar HH thing with Splendomatic tuning, dependable tremolo arm thing. So this is yeah, it's one of those offset jobbies, and it's a funny little beast really, because it's your 24-inch short scale, and it's a Fender. It's got your really nice single simple split post tuners, big headstock thing, CBS style flavoured headstock, and it's got renowned. It's got two humbuckers, but it's got renowned to have the most complex wiring of any Fender apparently. As you can see, there's switches and switches on various different things, and what little I've learned so far is that these change the coils from humbuckers to single, or a blend therein. They're halfway between it. There's a missing kill switch there that doesn't operate. Volume, tone, and you've got pickup on, and then I believe something like a high pass filter to take the bass out of the tone, which I won't really hear on this little amp. But anyway, so we can hear it. The strings are just so dead. Anyway, so pickup's off, front one on, beautifully out of tune. Switching this from single, double humbucker here to single. I'm not hearing much difference, but single. Let's put the, you hear it gets bigger when you put the low pass filter thing up. Humbucker, single. I'm not hearing much difference. Anyway, so I tuned this up a minute ago and it's already out of tune, so just give it a, and these strings are dead. Get rid of this reverb. Because of its tone settings, check that. I'm struggling to hear the difference, I have to say. The humbucker is in this direction. I think it has to be. That's the only difference I can hear is anyway, I can't tell. So humbucker pushed this way, single coil thins it out a little bit, pushed towards the front. You can hear the difference with this high pass filter set on, more off, I would say. The high pass filter, typically on a sound editing thing, a high pass filter will take out the low frequencies. So down is high pass filter engaged, strips out the low frequencies, up includes them back in. Anyway, let me try and tune this a minute. So dead. I can't use harmonics. Pinging at the nut and it's out of tune straight away. So if I yank this string, straight out of tune. Now this is one of those examples of no matter how old the strings are, if they aren't stretched, these are clearly ages old, right? Ages old, and yet if you stretch them, they're miles out of tune. So just a little demonstration there that it doesn't bear any relation to how old your strings are. So this thing is going horribly out of tune because A, because there's slack in the strings, and B, because the nut slots are pinging, you just heard there. Right, they're also pinging on this horrible little string tree, the metal string tree, which is too grim to behold. Anyway, so we've got this guitar in. It's James's guitar. He's taken it as a trade on something, and it's got these two, I've forgotten what the names were, two Fender humbuckers on them that have got a good reputation for having a huge voice. This one, I don't know if you can see, but the bridge one is it's kind of all over the place. I don't know if it's been deliberately tuned out to take all the bass frequency out of this thing, but it looks a bit odd. It's miles away from the strings anyway, so we'll sort of balance that back up to see if we can get a better tone out of this thing. The action is quite high. It's pretty high actually, but I have a feeling that might be wrong. I'm not entirely sure how much adjustment room there is in the bridge without getting a screwdriver to it. But it's kind of, in a way, it's sort of depressing to see a Fender guitar with a Tune-o-matic style bridge on there. Although this looks reasonably solid unit, and you know it shouldn't be too much of a problem to intonate. So the thing I'm gonna, it's worth checking this out because that's not something not quite right down there. Now that, is it the string tree? No, it's actually that was actually the nut making that noise. But anyway, so that's worth taking care of. So this guitar it's had a fall on its face at some point, so it's got some nicks on the frets, and it's got some considerable fret wear at this end from the playing open chords. But as I mentioned, it does look like it's been dropped on its face, and there's particularly one there, and you can really feel it if you're bending a note there. So my task on this is going to be to, well, request from James is to obviously clean it up, set it up. He wants the action lowered, which is quite a lot of leeway, I have to say. Lowered from what's currently around about, it's just about 2.5mm there, and about 2, just under 2, 2.5 and 2, and yeah, so we want to lower that a bit anyway. It's a 9.5-inch radius, so it's never going to get down to kind of ultra low SG territory, but it should play better than this. And a kind of priority in dealing with the frets really is, yes, it's going to be to allow it to come down to this, to a lower action, but it's also to get rid of some of the wear. Now this, interestingly on this guitar, it really looks like it's been played thoroughly everywhere along its, and dropped, but apart from that, it's got kind of dents and wear pretty much everywhere along its along the frets, and also there's a chip on the nut, so we're going to replace that as well. So a fair bit to do, but let's make it play nicer than it does. Other things to note, well, what is there to note? 24-inch scale length, so it's a shorter scale. Renowned pickups, although they're a bit sort of, it's hard to tell with such awful strings on there, and I'm not really going to have any new ones. I've got some new ones ordered, they won't be in until Monday or Tuesday possibly. But yeah, the kind of main thing at the moment is the condition of the frets, and to replace the nut. But otherwise it should end up playing really well, and we'll tweak the pickups into a sort of better position to pick up better and produce some more output, because they're renowned for being fairly high output, but at the moment they don't, certainly that bridge doesn't feel like it. It feels quite weedy, quite thin. So I'm going to do some measurements first and drink my tea, and then I'll sort of get stuck into it. So what am I interested in? Well, I'm interested in the height. I'm going to wipe some of these off because I've got quite a lot of measurements on here that are now history. Oh, bugger. Rubbed off something I did want to keep, but hey. Okay, so on this here guitar, right, I don't want permanent, right, that's what I want. Yeah, we got, so I'm going to put my other glasses on just to get a better look at the measurements. And it's about 2.25. So low E, last fret 2.25, and then high E, last fret. Actually, it's about, I would say it's about 1.5. High E, 1.5. Now I'm not really going to pay too much attention to the nut at this point, because I'm going to take that out of the equation shortly anyway. So I'm really just interested right now, as it stands, to see what sort of curvature is in the neck, and that's quite a big gap. Forget where, oh there it is, the thingy is. I'm going to use these strings as sacrificial strings, but right now it's obviously not going to sound very nice. I reckon that's about 0.4, 0.5 even. It's quite big. Matrix. I always find this quite difficult to check, really. You can usually just about see an air gap, depending on how your lighting is. Just under 0.5 then. Let's go 0.4. Either which way, it's probably a little bit higher than I would want. And the question is how well the truss rod works. Yeah, actually it's about 0.5. So I'd want to take it down a little bit, but that will mean an adjustment down here, because the truss rod helpfully on these is underneath the cover. But since I want to go under there anyway, to have a look, it's a bit sort of, what's the word? I'm just trying to think my way around the order of things here. To adjust the truss rod, I need to get it's a cross big screw job. So I need to really, I could take the strings off, remove the plate, get under there with a, I don't know what, I've forgotten the word for it, 90-degree thing which I've got in there somewhere. But it's just a hassle to get the scratch plate off. So the alternative is I slack this off, take the neck off, make a small adjustment first, put it back on before we do anything else, because what I want to do is I want to do the setup part before I get stuck into taking strings off, binning them, and then getting into the having a look under the electrics and doing any checking out, see if there's any loose connections. But I think the thing that's important here straight away before I make the I'm doing things in different orders here, but before I make the adjustment to the truss rod, which I prefer to do first, but I'm going to first of all check to see whether we've basically run out of any adjustment on the action we have. So the limitation here is the bridge at its stops. So there's only two ways around that on this guitar, and then one is to shim the neck slightly up, or the other one is to take away material from the underside of the a little bit from the underside of this bridge, which I'm not going to do on this guitar, but if it was a keeper budget guitar I might well do. But in the end it's going to probably require a small shim if we're going to get a lower action. So it's at its limits of, oh no, where's my phone? It's at its limits of adjustability, which kind of puts a kibosh on any lower action unless we do a shim to basically tip up this end of the neck a little bit more. So I'm going to do that, and at the same time I want to, before I do any fret leveling work, or let's say dressing, to get rid of these huge great divots and grooves, what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a little bit of photography. So I'm going to try and put this for a second to plane safe mode. I'm going to do a little bit of taking pictures so I can just compare before and after, really. There's some really big chinks out of these threads. They have taken a face forward, and it's very typical of what you get when the guitar falls over at a gig or something, and it smacks the frets down into the the strings down into the frets, and it leaves quite a mess of grooves and notches behind. So I can take some shots and then a bit of zoom in a bit afterwards. And then down here it's all basically just pretty worn. Always looks, it's easier to spot with the bare eye, the naked eye, than with a photograph, funnily enough. Anyway, that gives me an idea. So we've got a few things to do. We've got to take the neck off, adjust the truss rod a little bit, and so it's two curves, so I want to make sure. We may find when we get under there it doesn't adjust any further anyway, so we may be stuck with the amount of curvature we've got. These are the things you don't know until you get into it. We've discovered that we can't go any further with this bridge, so we're going to have to, if anything, we're going to have to make an adjustment with a shim. So that all says, well, take the neck off. We need to change this out for a new one, so in a way we might as well do all of this now with these strings. I was going to say slack, but they come out pretty quickly because of the nature of the split post arrangement. So I'm going to start by taking these all off, and we'll do the removing of the nut and replacing it with a new one, and then followed by shimming the neck a little bit, followed by what was the other thing? Oh yeah, adjusting the truss rod just a little bit too. So I'm hoping we'll get these back on, because they're horrible strings, but I do need them for the purposes of doing the fret leveling. So at this point, as I'm about to take the neck off, I have no idea what to find under here. We don't know. We know there's a small hairline crack down here, but we don't know anything else about the condition underneath. So quite easy to undo, which is good. You don't ever want it to be too tight, because it's when you, that felt fairly tight. When you shove a neck pocket, when you bolt a neck in too tightly into a neck pocket, it's when you can pull it in so hard to the pocket that it can split either the wood of the pocket, or, as some people believe, just the lacquer whichever. I mean, this is polyurethane lacquer, which is quite brittle. I suppose all lacquer is, and there's some big chunks already taken off this from its years of gigging, I expect. It's certainly been well used. That's the good thing about it. It's always nice to see a guitar that's got lots of use, and it has that beautiful Fender, I think beautiful Fender neck on these sorts of guitars. It's very old styly. So I'm just basically for the first thing, I'm just getting the neck bolt out, and then I'm going to take the neck off, make the adjustment, find a shim. I tend to, the shimming thing is, it doesn't have to be 1/1000th of an inch exact, because what you want to do, what have we got here, wax or something, that's telling, you might find something under here. Yeah, with the shimming, what you want to really be able to do is to lift the neck up high enough to give yourself back some play in the bridge. So you actually want it higher than you would at first think. So there we have it. Made in Mexico. A barcode and I guess a little, I guess it's a shim already. Well, it's, yeah, it's a marker of some kind, but it seems to be acting as a shim. Apart from that, there's nothing else sitting in the pocket. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my same screwdriver, and I'm going to guess, just fit it into there. I'm just going to feel what happens. Okay, so we have some turnability, and I've just turned a little bit. And again, this is the annoying part of having the adjuster in the heel end, because you can never make a precise adjustment with the neck under tension. You have to make a best guess like that. So you make a little turn, and then you're hoping that when you put the strings back on, it will have curved to the amount that you want. And there's no way of gauging it, guessing it. Every neck will be different, every neck will respond differently. And the nearest thing I can hope for example, if I'm looking at this, because honestly there's no calculation that makes any sense, we're just winging it now. I'm going to say I'm going to start at level on this. I want to flatten this out completely level, right, and I'm going to let the tens bend it into the kind of relief I want. Okay, and that's all I can hope for. And if it's now too stiff, then I'll find out when there's no relief at all, and I have to come back under here, take it off again, and so go somewhere between those 2 points. And the only way I can know really is either I can mark the little cross on here, but in reality I'm just going to go by feel. But that's the downside of having the adjuster in the end. If you had it at the heel end, which is why some clever person invented it that way, ultimately, then at least you have it under strong tension when you're making the adjustment, and that allows you to see what happens, because the guitar's still under load, or the neck is still under load. So I'm just now doing a little cut on the end of this nut, because it's been obviously lacquered into place. So I'm just breaking the seal, which is a shame. I always hate to do that, but hey. And then really there's not a lot else to do in this other than to hope to loosen this. Now there's just basically two things I found you can do with this. Is you can loosen it by this little tool, which was made for me by Chris Barker ages back as a gift, and you can sort of give it a couple little raps. In a way, what you're hoping to do is just split any glue away. Now the danger of this always is that on a Fender guitar you've always got this little bridge of rosewood on the other side, and it always is a danger when you start whacking away at the nut in that direction. You always run the risk of breaking off part of that little bridge of wood, or that little leftover bit. And also, if the nut's been stuck in with glue pretty well stuck beforehand, what you can often find is as it comes out, it can take a flake of this, or a leaf, a bit like you know when you're cutting up a fish, it'll take a nice leaf of the grain out with it. Not what you want. So sometimes you might be lucky and you might find that once you've started this thing moving, you might find that it will then move when you try to drift it out. It's very rare that just happens like that, I have to say. It's a bit of a flimsy tool at this point because it's got too much movement in it. It's had its day really, but it's good for the sort of tapping the other direction. So there's a couple of ways I do it. Sometimes I'd now go in and just lever it out with a very fine screwdriver and a tapping motion. And if it really is stuck, then the only other thing I might do is cut down the middle of it, down longitudinally with what's the thing I'm looking for in my head? With a device I'm thinking about is a coping saw, and basically cut. In cutting it with a saw, what you do is you'll take about 0.5 millimeter out, which will allow it to collapse in on itself, which is another way of getting it to come out. So this is another way you can try. Bearing in mind, I'm either going to be resting on the tuners or the tuners or the wood of the headstock, and this is just a taster really to see if it's got any movement in it at all, and you can pretty quickly tell if it's going to go anywhere. That's the smaller of the two, and then you can get it just under there, and if it's going to come out, it's going to let you know. So that's moving and it's going to come out pretty well. So I'm just going to gently lever it out like this. See? Again, all being delicate, gentle. It's not in bad shape, this nut. It's a curved one as well because it's a curved bottom. So that's going to be possibly a little challenging because I don't have a curved one. So I may have to build a curved radius onto this thing. Oh joy! Because I don't want it rocking at either end, to be honest. So it's doable. It just takes a little bit of hard work and precision. We use this one as a guide, and then it's a bit of manual labour. And I'll probably just go off camera while I fiddle about with that. So anyway, there's my replacement. Obviously it's newer and it's cleaner. It's also a little tiny bit thinner, narrower. So this one, isn't it always the way? You get a custom, or you get an old nut that happens to be chunkier than the replacement. Sun Mustangs were great for that. You'd always have the nut was actually much wider than this, so you always had to make a custom nut. This one, once this is rounded off at the bottom, I think this one will glue in pretty much okay. But any further than that, I would have to cut one from scratch, which is a faff. I might consider it. So I'm not going to drag this out on camera. I'm going to tidy up here a minute. I'm going to clear the bench so I can get on with this nut. I'm going to make the nut. Obviously I'm not going to test out the relief in the neck yet until I've finished the nut, so I might as well just get that done and I'll go and put the radio on. So I'll see you when that's done and I've restrung the guitar, and we'll examine the relief then, and then if the relief is good, what I'll do actually yeah, sorry, while I'm doing that I will pick myself a piece of material for the purpose of shimming, and I don't really know what I'm going to use yet. I sometimes go with a bit of, it's got a nice bit of brass here, and that's about, I don't know how thick that is, but we could, going to need a fair shim to lift up enough height to give us some play back in that bridge, because there's no point just being on the bottom. So this is about 0.75 of a mil, that piece of brass, but it's a nice solid substance, and it's going nowhere and doing no other work, so I might start with that, and if that's too much I'll then work back away from that. So see you in a bit when I've got those bits done, and then we'll take it from there. Yay! After all of that, I did end up making a replacement. This one, the spacing wasn't quite right. This was just sorry, turn the radio off. That was a Chinese stock replacement that I've got several of. So Anyway, yeah, I made a custom one, which is great fun. It's very laborious and time consuming, and the hardest bit is actually getting the spacing right. But I've got this one that's right, and it fits in absolutely perfectly. It's even got the correct curve. Obviously I'm going to cut deeper into there and take more off and then remove the excess afterwards, but that's the first part of the thing. Now I could, it's such a snug fit, I don't even think I'm going to glue it in. I'm just going to leave it like that so the next person can remove it easily when they want to. Now yes, I pulled out a piece of material and I was going to cut myself a little shim. Was I not? Yes, I was. So let's begin with a bit of, oh look, it's just almost perfectly shaped. How wonderful. So I'll make myself a little shim-shaped shing, which is, remember, 0.75 millimeters in wideness. This may be a bit tough for this snips to cut, but we'll give it a go. Yeah, nah, they ain't cut through anything, these. And it may struggle to stay straight, that's the other thing, because it might start bending as I do this. It's not too bad. I can squish this flat with the whatever those things are there. The vise, yes. And I'm going to, while I'm at it, since I'm in ultra perfectionist mode today for some reason, take these little bits of brass offcuts and chuck them on the floor ready for the vacuum cleaner, so they don't get caught up in anyone's guitars, is the basic thing. So I'm just going to put that in there, give it a stretch, squish both sides just to flatten it out, so it doesn't, we don't really want it in there sprung exactly. It doesn't have to be massively flat, but it's better than it being springy. Okay. So there's our little bit. Now what I might do, just because I am in ultra perfection mode, I'm going to get my little metal file. I've been doing some good work with this today. I'm just going to take away the little burrs on that and take away the corner bit, so that no future individual runs the risk of slicing the finger off. Okay, so this is my initial plan. Now some people like to get all mathematical and precise, you know, in measuring shims, and to be honest, you could do, but I'm not a maths person, and numbers are not entirely my thing. So what I'm going to do instead, like bone dust there, look at it, it's everywhere. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put this shim in at 0.75, and then if it's way too high, then what I'll do is I will come back and re-evaluate and do a thinner one. So that fits beautifully in the pocket. On goes our neck with it. If you remember, it's adjustments. I want the correct, that one. And I'm going to put these under about a 4 thingy. Torque is what I mean. I'm going to hold this up. I'm not going to do it that way around because it's left-handed. Well, I could, but it's just a bit odd. So the purpose of this is to get the neck back on. See how the strings lie. So what I'll do is I'll just gently sort of put things in place to begin with, and then we'll drive the screws in one by one and sort of line everything up. Oops, there goes the neck, one by one, and then we'll see how it lies. Now we could, I mean, in this you can put the strings back on as your way of finding out whether it worked or not. So put it another way, how high it's gone. Or you can probably do it with a straight edge to give you some idea. You'll see. Sorry, you're looking downwards. Okay, so heareth my shim in action. And again, it's not critically important that it's all the way up, but I will do all 4 up to the level of 5 on my thingy. So I can see the slight gap that this produces. obviously it's, you know, 0.75 is a fairly big shim. Now, actually we can do it with a string, it's probably just as easy. So we get one of these strings which is all mangled up and tangled, now we can prop it in there. With a bit of luck, maybe we can get it to bite again, bring it round, and we'll just run it over the top of our new nut and get it onto here. Okay, so that's now brought the neck right up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this up now to see just how far we have to go to get it into the right sort of playing action. Now if it's too far up, we have to go, it's very stiff, it's because it's a tight fitting thing. If we have to go too far up to get a playing action, then we can reduce the shim, which I think is what we're going to do. So that's cool. So what we had, point something, 0.75, so we can go half that for the next one. I'm just looking at how far I have to go further. I mean, it can just give me a quick guideline, you see. I can lift that up off there, and I would need another millimetre or two. So that was too big, which is fine, I don't mind. What I'll do now is, while I'm at it, I'll just get my shimming material. Now the next options I've got some thin copper, which is put it back. Everything else is in a complete pigsty and I put this back. How good of me. This one now is coming at 0.752, which is again too high. So I'm on the hunt now for something subtler. I thought I had some 0.3 copper. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. You know, it's all looking a bit chunky. Well, I've got brass and other things, and plastics and all manner of good stuff, but I was hoping some custom cut copper. Yeah, there's my tin. I've got tin. I've got brass. Let's go and look in the department of what I call those things, shims. Department of shimmer. Oh look, here's the brass shimmery. No, that's tin, which I've got some more. But let's see what this comes out at. Okay, so it's 23. Let's bite a chunk off to begin with. 23. Keep that there. And let's find the other stuff, which is brass, if we can. I don't know why, but I like to use metal. It's a sort of thing of mine. Stay where you are. Now, this is not the best arrangement in the house, but it'll do for now. Oh, look, a pair of gloves. Oh look, some copper. Brass. Thin brass. Okay. So this comes in at 33. So I've got a feeling that's probably more the thing I want. So let me just take a chunk of this, and then I'll put all of these spare bits back away. So there's our two things. I mean, the point here is that there's no option where there's no further adjustment possible on the bridge with the way the neck is currently set. So you either destructively deal with the bridge, which, as I said before, I don't mind doing on a guitar it's mine and I'm keeping, but I'm obviously not too keen to do on somebody else's. So what we'll do is I'll just copy this shim. I'll find the thing again. Copy the shim shape, and we'll go with brass for now. So a very small shim makes a big difference on the bridge. I suppose the question would be, why does this guitar, you know, why is there no further adjustment available at the bridge? You know, was this thing really designed to play with a beyond 3mm playing action at the last fret? Well, possibly, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't have thought so. But you know, it's not unlike an electric. No, I'll say that again. Unlike an acoustic guitar, it doesn't. It's not going to move over time. The geometry isn't going to change over time. So an acoustic guitar, you get the you often get the headstock. Sorry, the neck heel sinks in and the bridge rises up. So those two things together create a sort of a raising up of the bridge action. Obviously on an electric, that's not really a possibility. So I don't really think anything's made major movement over the years. So really all we can suggest is, yes, it was made to play very high action, and you know, there are a lot of people who have different views on this, and some people will say, well, what I'm doing to it to make it play with a lower action is sacrilege. You know, you either man up and learn to play with a high action, or you leave guitars alone. But there you go. I'm all for doing what customers seem to want, which is an easier to play guitar. You know, that's the main reason for doing it. Okay, so just double checking, we've got the reduced shim in there, same sort of shape, same sort of size. Fit that back together again, press it into place before doing anything else, kind of make sure everything sits back down, and then discover you've got the screws on the wrong side of the thing. Switch it to clockwise or doing upwise. Just holding things kind of in place with my hand badly. It's a bit of an offset shape, so it's quite difficult to do. So just need to get one hooked up first. And so on and so on. So remember, I'm testing both the shim height at this point, and when I've got strings loaded on, testing the amount of relief in the neck with the set, which are 10s on this guitar. I believe they're 10s at the moment. So kind of, we're doing two different things here. Now with this guitar, it's going to want to begin with sit up against the corner of the heel. So just get these two in first to position the plate, and then once the two have positioned the plate, I can put the others in, and then going a bit stronger with this one than this one. Catch hold of that. Okay, well this, I'm sure this will make the gap look a lot less. Oh. Come along, where have you gone? Oh yeah, there you are. I didn't have to get out my magnet thing, which I've had to employ a few times recently. So yeah, I'm just going to sort of tack these up a bit tighter. It holds on to the bit, which is hilarious. Okie doke. Now we're going to test it with, again, a single string really to begin with. This is only about the positioning, so if this is very tight. I don't know what's happened here, but sometimes you get that when the bridge isn't really sitting very well on the thing. It doesn't have, because if the posts are anything like that, you just literally can't undo it any further, and that's all dictated by the verticalness of the post. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start with a bit of height either side, so I've got some down movement. This has got a very limited range. You've got to do, because the posts aren't exactly straight, you've got to do each side exactly pretty much at the same time as the other one to stand any chance of making an adjustment, which is a bit naff, I have to say, but it'll do for now. Okay, oh, get on there. Okay, so again, this is, at this point in time, we're just making a placement calculation. Obviously that's off the mark. Okay, now that's not enough. Well, it could be if I go down. Let's have a look. I've got a bit of downward movement left in the saddle. It might just be about right, actually. But no, if that's not enough, then we'll go to the tin. It's like a sort of prizes, isn't it? We went for the Went for the gold, now we've gone for the brass, now the tin. Just checking, hold this down because obviously the nut is really high. Now, actually, you know what, that's absolutely fine. We'll go with the brass. Go with the brass. Now, the next thing is going to string the whole thing back up. I'm going to check next for the alignment generally, so making sure. Can I get this on? No, I can't get this on. I have to pull this apart a bit. We're going to check for the neck relief and also the string alignment. So at this point in time, I want to see if we've got the right amount of adjustment or relief in the truss rod. That's not really going to help, is it? And we can only really find that out by loading the neck, thanks to the position of the truss rod adjuster. So we'll kind of do that bit next, and then after that we'll do the next bit, which is, oh yeah, cut the nut slots down to a good playing action, and just ensuring it's surprisingly difficult to cut nut slots in the right place. It's really difficult. Anyone who's tried it, you can have all kinds of marking devices, but the only way you're really going to do it is if you have some sort of jig that does it for you. Like, there's a tiny difference here, I need to balance this out a little bit, but it's the only way you can tell is to get the strings in. We've got a load of vertical height, which gives us plenty of room to make those kind of minute adjustments, but it is a difficult process. I'm not fond of it. I mean, I've made loads, but I've not yet found myself like this little cutting jig. I suppose in the long run I could probably end up with some sort of little guide thing made out of some sort of beautiful steel construction that would allow my nut slots to run through. But then you're going to have one for vintage Strat, one for vintage Tele, one for a tweak, tiny adjustment on a Les Paul. There's going to be a lot of variation. So sometimes you have no choice but do it by eye or by marking up and comparing them, and that's what I've done here. But I think just one of them is just slightly out. But like I said, there's room at this stage for tweak. If this was my guitar, I would certainly replace the string tree, but the problem you got is that it's if you replace it, you will replace it ultimately with something better, which would be a Tusk one. I might actually fit a Tusk one for James now, just for fun. Homemade Tusk one, so it's not hugely expensive. It's only a bit of time spent making it, and then he can change it out if he's going to sell it, so you put it back to original. But even a homemade Tusk one made from reclaimed Tusk material would be better than this pinging, scraping metal thing that you've got fitted. That's standard, which I'm looking at the sort of list price of these guitars. It appeared to be around about the 900 quid mark, so getting a horrible metal string tree for 900 quid. Okay, so everything's looking good there, except a tiny adjustment needed on the A. I've got to go just a fraction to the side, and it's such a small amount that it's going to be very careful. All fine down here. So looking at the action, I've got well, we're not under tension yet, so just cross my fingers that this will last long enough, the strings will last long enough to go up to pitch. Well, forget that for a minute. We've got a mile high action at the nut, which is fine. We'll work downwards from that. But what I'm interested in right now is going to be various things. Obviously the last fret action on here, and actually it's probably fraction low on the treble side, and then probably a fraction high on the bass side. But this bridge really doesn't want to do that because of the way it's horribly constricted. really doesn't want to do anything. So I think we're going to be lucky to do anything else with it. I mean, the way around it is to actually drill out these posts by a fraction, and there's nothing special about this bridge here, but I'm not going to do anything destructive to this. But to be honest, it's not the best. Now this is showing me I want to make an adjustment to the position of the strings, sorry, the alignment of the neck, and I'd want to bring it fractionally towards me, also towards the wall, which I could probably do before. Yeah, I'll find a way of doing it down towards here. It's probably the easiest way before putting back in the screws. So you can make little position alignments. So I'm happy with the position of the height of the action. I'm going to take these three out and put a bit of slack on this one, and then I'm going to change my direction of my and I'm going to push down a little bit. I'm going to go back in whilst pushing down. And then missed. And then take a look at where it sits just now. That's a bit better. That's as good as it's going to get in terms of direction. Yeah, that's all right. I mean, there's no, apart from bending it a bit more, there's no movement, no other movement. This is there's no other position you can put that's spread. The nut is as positioned as well as it can be, so it's pretty much equidistant. It's just I'm slightly nervous about the rounded edge of these frets because they're worn, but I can't really do much about that just now. So what I'm going to do is, while I'm happy with the position of that, I'm going to put some manual turns on the screws, the neck bolts screws, starting with the bottom ones. And that's going to be my, I'm happy with that, job done, location. You could use a torque wrench or torque driver or some sort of thing if you really wanted to, but I quite like doing it by hand. Now this really wants to go down some. Having pulled it all the way in now, kind of change bits a minute, match this up as close as I can. That's not going to fit. No, that's not going to work. When you get to something that starts to get really require a bit of muscle power, like these bridge posts do, you're going to want to match up your bits as closely as you can, because they do take quite a bit of force to get them down. Right, let me just double check this. Okay, I'm going to put the capo back on just to do another check that obviously it's completely thrown out by this massive action at the nut, which we've got to take care of afterwards. But now looking at just under 2, so I still want to go in some more, a two-handed adjustment. I've still got room, which is great. Okay, and then we're just over 1.5 there, and we're low there, so I'm going to come back out with this one. I say it does require quite a wrench, so I'm still okay. We're on 1.1 there, and just over 1.5. Now this is my sort of trademark low action, and some people will say, oh, on an old guitar or an old style guitar or a 9.5 radius you'll never get it. Well, maybe, but there's no harm in sort of starting out aiming for it. Now what I wanted to know at this point as well now was the amount of loading on the neck, because I did an adjustment, if you remember, so it's a good opportunity now to see what we're left with in terms of relief, and it's smaller, which is good, and if it's around about 0.3 of a mil, then I'm kind of content to leave it there, and it's probably a fraction over 0.3. I'd say about 0.35, but let's start with that. We can always make a final adjustment later if it's not good the way things are. The amount of curvature doesn't bother my fret leveling system, as you probably know. I'm going to level to whatever curve is in there, and in this case, if it's more of a curve, i.e. there's more relief than I'll probably end up wanting, then I'll just further curve the truss rod that I'm using. I'm just going to raise these pickups a little bit, and sometimes these are obviously stepped down on the bass side to kind of reduce some of the bass tone, bass frequencies. This one's all over the shop, so I'm going to balance it right up and see what we get. Obviously at the bridge also it's relatively further from the strings, so it could benefit from quite a lift to give a sort of fairly chunky bridge response. And I'll still leave it backed off on the bass side a little bit, so I'm taking the cue from how the guitar already was, but it's very different from where it was before. Okay, the only downside is when I get this done later on, I won't be able to just kick off and play it. I'll have to wait for the tens to arrive. Now, the thing I want to fix right now before I go any further is this slightly out of position A string. I'm going to fire up this light here. Sorry if it's sorry if it's a bit in your face. Now, I can see this is off only as far as kind of one width of a lamb's tail. So this is the fun bit. So I've got to take this hole and I'm going to expand it to almost next door to where it was. So I could do a couple of things. I could get a thickest of these whatsits to begin with, and I could run this along exactly the same mark as the other one, but widening it from the same start point. So I'm just going to do that this way for a second, and having made that mark, just look at it. Now it's almost there, but it's still a milli fraction to the wrong side. So I'm going to just again cut. I can feel the edge of it. I'm going to just try and chip away, so I'm working inwards on that shape a little bit. Now I've got quite a bit of room to play with. There you go, spot on. In fact, I've got a little bit of room to move either side, but I like it like that. Now, because I've got so far to go down, I can now concentrate on cutting that. That's absolutely perfectly spaced, which is rare because it's bloody hard to do, if you'll excuse my French. Right, now here's the fun bit. I'm going to cut down. Now, the question I've got is, do I want... No, I absolutely don't want to go any further out on that side because I will not have any room left. Okay, so it is in the best, it's in the optimum position right now, and I have to just accept that. So, okay, what I'm going to do is just retune this again now. Sort of. Now the purpose of having the guitar in tune at this point isn't really about the notes, the music side of it. It's really just about, sorry if you can't see too well, I'm going to move you around. It's more about the tension on the neck than anything else, or tension on the slot. I want the string to be kind of pulling into the slot as well as possible. So I'm going to use my standard oversized 10 set here, he said, having kept them together since the last one I did shortly before, which was my SG. Move a few things out of the way. Chuckle piece of jagged brass. I'm going to have to crimp that and bend it over before I do that to myself again, or before it goes in the bin and I do that to myself. Okay, Safety first, eh? Right. Crimped and rendered safe. Right, so what I'm going to do is, my aim now is to get this first fret action down to a nice low setting, and I'm going to use my oversized 10 set, as I've mentioned, and I'm going to use the aid of a few other things in this point, because it's going to take a while to get down. It's got a lot of material to go down. I didn't want to try and pre-cut this nut down because basically, having handmade it, I couldn't afford the risk of overcutting it and having to start again. I'd rather take the time and work downwards, which is going to be a little bit time consuming, but hellfire, that's all I can do. Now, you can probably see okay. Right. So I like the positioning on all of these, but I've got a long way to go down, and it's going to be a process of careful work. So here's the D. I'm going to take this out. I'm going to cut down first of all, following the same line, cut backwards and down, and I really want it to cut in sort of center to the same line. I don't want it to wobble or veer to one side. So this triangle file is quite good for that. It doesn't really go anywhere other than straight downwards. So you can see I'm creating quite a big notch, and the good thing about a notch at this stage in the game is that it doesn't grip the string. A notch is usually a sort of straight down cut which leaves the sides unfettered, and you can basically drop your string right to the bottom of the slot like that. And as I get further down, nearer to the desired action, then I will sort of switch over to use other things. Now, if it's taking its time, I could help it along by going in here with a fairly chunky file, which will cut. It's a base nut file, so in a way it will go into the slot and then cut a flat bottomed chunk out the bottom, and just it'll make a squared off slot. And then if I want to, I can sort of back up again with the notch, sorry if it's shaking the table around. As you can see, it's a long way down, and we're going to need to remove all of this excess material, and it'll look pretty ragged for the time being, but it will end up being nice and neat at the end. Okay, so I'm kind of, I look at my target point 3 out of here, and I can see the gap and see how far away I am. And at this stage, it just makes sense to use the V file as much as possible until I'm near where I want to be, because this just keeps me with loads of space so that the file won't get caught. Now I'm working on the D slot, so I'm going to now introduce the 32, and I'm going to make sure this now goes right in the center of that slot bottom, and I'm tilting backwards, and I'm just trying to create sort of go down from the bottom of that slot now with this D, and it's a 32 thousandths. Now if you remember, I haven't glued this in, so I can make a tiny adjustment to this if I want to once it's cut and everything's in place. I'm getting nice and low now. We're almost on the mark with this one. You see, it's not a quick process, and there's tons of excess material to remove at the end. But the excess over the top is really not a problem. It's just a matter of time, a little bit of time with the wheel, the Dremel wheel, and then I can just kind of cut all that, or Dremel off all that excess. What's really important at this point is to get that backward tilting slot right down to the exact right height that we want. We're getting close to it, so I'm kind of willing myself to work as slow and as gently and as smoothly as possible at this point, because when you're working at the bottom of a trench, it's kind of very close. When you're at the bottom of a trench, and if you're getting sort of gripped by the trench, it's then you're going to start sort of making snatching movements, and it's then you run the risk of overcutting, which on this nut, having gone all that, great, I'm going to stop there, having gone all of that way to get this right, that would be a real pain. You can see straight away the vast difference between these two. This first one that's cut down to a nice low action. I'll take a sort of comparative picture of that so it looks quite extreme. Now the 0.3 that I'm setting over this first fret is going to obviously change when I do the dressing, because there's going to be a very small further reduction in the height. Obviously the fret is going to get a fraction lower. Now I need to be between these two marks here, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get me a little rounded end file for a minute, because I just want to kind of clear a smooth semicircular space so it's not caught in any one place, and that looks about right. So then I can just go from here, and I'm going to work right down the middle of this semicircular thing, and I'm just going to do it a little bit so it will hold the string, and then I'm going to stop again, make sure that that sits nicely halfway, which it is, in which case then I can reintroduce the V file. I'm not quite sure it is there yet. Let's go back with, where's the other one? Let's go back with this one. Where am I? If you're working your way into it, you've got a few different levels to snag the string on, so I'm just going to try and make sure I'm on the mark first before it. That's good. So I'm going to work from there onwards. I'm just going to use this fatter side of this one to just widen the slot. Kind of basically establishes that now as the place I'm going, and it's in the right position. So just a not trial and error exactly, but it's just a careful incremental process to arrive at where you're going. And you know, even at this point now, I still have a bit of room for maneuver because I'm so far off the vertical height. I can always kind of move a little bit to one side or the other, and that's the benefit of having all this extra material. Downside, of course, is you've got to work your way down to the playing action eventually. One of the things that is quite difficult when I set a low first fret action on a Fender style guitar, and you can see somebody in a previous life has clipped the edge of this. It's quite difficult to, if you're using a low action, to get the low action set without clipping the wood behind here, because you have to, not only are you going for a low action, but you're also working slightly backwards, and it has to have a degree of backwards tilt to the slot, otherwise your string can end up sort of sitting horizontally and not resonating correctly, or not yeah, you know, it doesn't sit on the leading edge of the nut where it's supposed to. But to get that, sometimes you almost can't avoid clipping the edge, particularly if this piece of rosewood extends back further. On some guitars they've kind of made it go back for miles, in which case you almost invariably dig out a little gouge. To be honest, I think it's a small price to pay for getting the right playing action over the first fret, but you know, I just sometimes have to say to people, you know, you are going to get a little gouge there. It's kind of almost impossible by hand to gauge the angle. If you, maybe there's a machine you can get that does it, but right now, like this, very difficult to just work down to the exact height and avoid clipping the edge back there. As you can see, it's always a guesstimate, the angle that I'm doing this at. So when you're working on these big slots, what you notice is if you're going down a long way, you will get a kind of binding at some point. You can alleviate it by rocking backwards and forwards, side to side a little bit. But if you get stuck and you're still off the bottom, if you like, just kind of go in again with this thing here, and again stop, check you haven't overcut, and it's just basically will give you back a little bit of, release the grip on this file. You know, some people I think prefer to try and cut upwards from the bottom you know, to try and calculate exactly how much to sand off the bottom of a nut and to, you know, end up at the perfect sort of playing action. I think it's almost impossible to do that, which is why I go from the top and take so much time doing it, because I've never, I mean, I've done this a lot and I have never managed to cut up the right amount to get to the right action. You know, we're talking such tiny amounts here. This 0.3 of a millimetre is really minuscule, and it's very, very difficult to reach it by measuring and calculating how much to take off the underside of the nut. I've never managed to do it, and that, you know, that's a lot of experience trying. So for the amount of difference this makes to how your guitar plays, I think this is absolutely worth doing and taking the time to do. Now, even though at the moment this looks incredibly messy and maybe ragged for sure, this is, when we get there, as I said, I can take off the excess above. Now, even if you don't have these nut files, Japanese nut files like I do, you can do a pretty good job with the jeweler's diamond file that I've been using to sort of get going with, because actually it's near enough rounded out at the bottom. What we see as a you know, a sharp notch actually is never kind of precision sharp. It's always a little bit rounded off, and then the string can sort of sit in there and round it off itself. It is better if you're going to use that file. I always recommend getting some of those welder nozzle cleaners and using them to round out the bottom of the slot. But even if you haven't got those, but you have some old strings that you can put to work to do the same thing, that's pretty good. It's better than nothing, and you can go some way to rounding out the bottom of the slot. Now I'm having to go very carefully here because we're getting very close, and yet we're also miles down inside the slot. So I'm tempted now to just try and free up the slot a little bit, just get a bit more space to move, but conscious that we'll, you know, there's a risk of taking it down. There's still fresh air and the notes resounding or ringing out, so we know we've got a little bit more to go. You can see I'm using a broken off one here. Eventually these files get slightly warped and bent, and you end up trying to make a straight line with a slightly curly thing, and it not only won't work very well, it also tends to create a bend, particularly in a Les Paul neck, which is a nut which is much deeper. You can introduce so much of a curve into it with these slightly bent files that you end up with the nut grabbing the string all the time, and it'd be really frustrating. I'm happy with that, given the scale of the task at hand. Right, so you can see two strings now down at the nice low level. Now this next one is quite tricky. It's on an edge, kind of, and I want it to go straight down. I don't want it to roll inwards or outwards, so I've got to be very particular about the sort of verticality of this slot, verticalness. So I'm going to use this thing here, and I'm going to try, first of all, just to go and cut in, and I'm going to check again for positioning as I go, but I'm really focused on getting this vertical. Now once I've got it vertical, I can do some sort of widening stuff on it, but I want it to go right the way down in that straight line. This position looks good still, which is great. And then I'm going to just again keep cutting. This is a sort of bulk removal really, more than anything else at this stage. I will need to widen it as we go. Okay, that's looking good. Now if I widen it, it's just for the sake of freeing up things. Again, it's still important at this stage to try and keep the top of this perpendicular level with the fingerboard, because what I'm trying to do is just keep that whole slot, whatever you want to call it, going down in a nice vertical thing. I don't want it running this way as we're doing it, so I'm going to keep stopping and working with, well, we're going to check the height first and then go back to the vertical miles off. Alright, now I've got 48 one here, so I can get to work with that a bit. Now what I've got is, in fact I'm going to use the orange one. What I've got is, I need to just get this slot still going vertically and make sure it's really well established, and then once I've done that, I'll use the 48 file rounded out a little bit at the bottom. Checking all the while, making sure that's good, we're in position, the gaps are right. Now I can use the 48 here, and again, like the previous one, now this can be a sort of painstaking process of nibbling away until it's down at the right sort of height, and this will help just round out the bottom. Slow. And again, still concentrating on getting this to go vertically into this nut. I don't want it wandering off because it's near the edge or anything like that. You wouldn't necessarily have this problem with a pre-made nut, but when you're doing the custom stuff, you have to pay attention to it. So just keep on going. We're not too far off now. You see, there's no quick way. A little bit more. Yeah, there's no speedy way of getting this done. You really have to stick at it and wear away very slowly, so you don't overcut and you don't mess it up. A bit more. Now you end up with, at this moment, we've got quite a deep notch in a nut that if it was on a Les Paul might be weak enough to pull, you know, with Les Paul strings pulling, loading the nut sideways, it might be, you know, run a risk of breaking it off. Okay. You know, sometimes also people talk about like, you know, checking the radius of this. Well, when you use the fret as a reference point, my string heights are going to mimic the or copy the radius or match the radius of the fret, because I'm measuring up from the fret, so I don't really have to have any gauges or guides. Oh, hello Morris, what have you got? Is that where it went? Ha! You beauty, how did you find that? That thing disappeared the other day. I thought a ghost had got it. Well done, Morris. Don't need it now, but good boy. Right, now I'm going to work. Yeah, you're very clever. I'm going to work with the G outwards. Again, same old thing. It's going to be boring, but I'm not one for stopping the video. Yes, Morris, so jump up on your chair and chill out, my friend. So again, the same sort of thing applies here. Is I've just got to ensure that this cut goes down the centre and keeps the spacing the way I want it. Thought to be quite brutal at this stage, but again, just checking every bit of the way and make sure we don't go off the mark. Kind of better to keep it under tension, actually, just to make sure it sits all the way into the slot the way it should. Just keep on keeping on. Now at the moment I'm probably aiming to go down straight line, until we get near the bottom, which again you can see visually, or we can measure by the gap over the feeler gauge, and we can use one of these to take out some bulk material, just working carefully out through the bottom of the slot, and then once we've taken a bit, just double check the positioning so it's still good. Now we see we've got quite a lot of room in there for movement because I've used this flat thing, so I'm going to do a little bit of widening using this, and I'm going to make sure when I have that I'm sitting at the bottom now. That's good. Now I'm going to work with the 24, so you can see it's a bit of guess and move and duck and dive. So I'm at the bottom of the slot now, and I'm going to work forward with this 24, what I think is the bottom of the slot, and I've created a bit of a place for the string to sit, and it's sitting there quite nicely, so and I can continue to work from there if Morris decides to come and join me to check the quality of what I'm doing. Okay, now I'll go back in and double check my heights, and we've still got some room to go. Now it's starting to grip a little bit, so you know, I might want to try and loosen it up with the V notch, the V file, but actually I'm sort of close enough that I don't want to risk overcutting, because I can't really tell with the V file. I may quite easily overcut, so while I can still do it with this one, I'm going to stick with it. Nearly there. Oh, Morris, don't drink that. Morris, I don't know what's in there, you're going to die. Sorry, Morris. It's grotty water. Saws. Oh, I'm sorry. You're going to knock over this guitar as well, aren't you? Come on. Yeah. Why don't you either sit on here or go out? It's never the right time, Morris. Right, let's go back to where we were. Almost on the mark. Okay, so a little bit more careful work down. This is quite funny because the top of the nut at this point just looks like a yeah, shaggy mess really, but it's anything but when it comes down to the slot at the bottom. You know, it's precise. Still got a gap. This I could do with a new set of these things actually from fresh, but I'm still making do. We're very close now. I'm going to stop on that one. It's close enough for my likings to move next. I'm going to say ugly looking sawtooth thing at the moment. And just the same old again. Just start with the slot that we've got and just work it out downwards. I think I'm in line for a new one of these as well, by the looks of it. I think I've just about killed it. Again, check the positioning. Okay, now if anything, I think we might be just moving a fraction too far to the left on this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to aim to kind of rescue that slot just slightly to the right, give myself another start point, because I've still got plenty of height to play with. Okay, so I'm going to still round it out a bit more. Right, that's now made a nice smooth cavity. It really is this difficult to get them exact. Alright, that looks to me nice right down the middle. So I'm just to one side of that. So I'm going to try and make my mark there. Again, this is just making a slot that I can just test. The string will sit in it for a moment, and I can say, am I on the ball there? That feels about right. And I might need to go a tiny, no, I'm on the mark. This one there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this one again, line it up on that new mark that I've made, and just to give it a bit more V notch, that's going to push the sort of, get rid of all the other little steps down the side, and that's pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to drop this one for a minute and carry on. A bit more with the V file, so since we're on the correct position, we might as well get the bulk work done. It's kind of, you can see it's a process of never quite committing to it until you're absolutely sure. Right, we're down in the middle of this slot now, and there's no real wavering, you know where you are. You're either at the bottom or you're not. Now I'm going to start to work out the slot from there. How far are we off? Yeah, a bit more. I'm just going to do some more with this, and I'm going to just push the slot slightly to the side because I've got a feeling it's just a bit off the mark. And I'm going to run out soon of adjustment room. Okay, you can just go back in with this a little bit. This is obviously just going to work away the top for now. So we still have there, and let's just put this one up here. Well, they actually are balanced. I'm just fooling myself. I'm getting over finicky. So down into the bottom of the slot. Just check it again, by the way. Still some fresh air. And then continue the working slot, the one that's going to do the business at the end. There we are. If you're doing this for the first time and you feel you're losing track because of the height of the nut, then you could kind of get most of the way to where you want to be, and there's no harm in stopping and taking off all this excess, because it will give you sort of a much more open sense of what you're doing. I'm sort of used to it by now, so I don't feel too lost or adrift working right at the bottom of this coal mine, bone mine. A little bit more. All the while, don't forget you're making sure this angles backwards towards the tuners, if you can, without chopping out too much of a gouge in this little piece of rosewood behind the nut. But to be quite honest, you can't get a backwards angle without touching it at some point. You really can't. It's almost nothing you can do. I'm very close to the mark there. Can stop there. I've got one more to go, and then we can have the pleasure of getting rid of all this excess. Now this one, I want to go to the outside line on this one. There are two little marks I can just about see, so I have to be careful. What I could try to do first is to use one of these and cut along the outside edge. Now I have sort of some recovery space if I get it wrong. Let's just have a look physically. Now that's a little bit narrow, it still needs to be on the outside of that. So I'm going to round this off for a minute and come at it again. So the rounding off bit clears the, oh, if I do it right, clears the notch out of the way and gives me a sort of a fresh run at the space. That's kind of more like I want it. Where do I want it? I don't want it there, do I? Yeah, I do really. So I want it on the edge of this. It's quite hard to identify. I want it on the edge of that thing there. Let's try that for a moment. Okay, yeah. So what I'll do is I'm going to use a 24 for a minute, something a bit bigger, and I'm just going to sort of confirm that slot using something that's oversized but not as big as one of those bass guitar things. Okay, I'm happy with that. So then I'll just check it again, see how far off the mark. We're a way off. So either, I don't think I could do a bit with this. Let's just have a look again. Okay, now I'm going to switch back to this 24 just to do a bit of bulk removal if I can, and then I'll sort of come back to ultimately the 13 at the end of all of this. Okay, so we're nearly there. So there's a little kind of lip in there, but we'll get rid of that when it comes to filing off all this stuff on top. Now, we're quite difficult to get down to where we're going without clipping the back edge of the rosewood. So now I'm going to switch to the final 13, and I've got a little sharp edge to work with there. So this is just going to slice away the last bits, and hopefully leave us where we want to be. Very, very near. So just a little bit more. So the nice thing about this is it doesn't really matter what the rest of the walls of the slot or the notch look like on the way up. What matters is that our string goes into place and there aren't any sort of jumps sideways. Lovely. Oh, blimey. See how long this takes? Right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off this. I still want the strings on because I'm going to use them as sacrificial Watsits. So I'm going to just take this right off, or mostly off. I want it off so that I can do the Dremel this off, make a nice nasty cloud of what time is it? Oh, is it the only time for the 20 minutes, 40 minutes, and I've got Blue Planet. We can't even miss that. So now I can do this bit, which is just going to make a stinking mess, but here we go. So there we're beginning to reduce this down. Now I could do a couple of things here just for the sake of this. If we wanted to use it like that, all I'd have to do is just gently widen those out a fraction like that, and we would have a usable slot. We can still carry on taking it down from here as well, but it's very neat and tidy. It doesn't really matter that the strings are in the slot a little bit, as long as it's free running. It's not a big issue, but for the sake of detail, basically you get as far as you feel safe to go without grinding the whole thing to non-existence. And then you've got a bit of cleaning up here, and if you want to, you can get a file and gently clean up the front edge of the nut and any of the corners. Just be careful when you do this sort of thing, because it's not easy to do without touching the fingerboard at some point, but a little bit of protection like that helps, and then you can just sort of soften off the edges, which otherwise might be sharp, and then a bit of that, which doesn't go affect the launch point of the strings any, as long as you don't go too far down and blunt it all off. So it just softens the feel of it under your fingers, basically. There you go. That's a nifty little custom nut. That's only taken several hours to make and get right. But the beauty of it is, oh, I'm not going to do that yet. What I am going to do is I'm going to mark these up ready for fret leveling. So the beauty of it is that we've now got the first fret action that I want, and now we're ready to mark off these frets and give them their, I was going to say fret leveling, but it's kind of more like a fret dress, but it may well be fret leveling as well, because I don't know, I haven't checked how they play at the action I've chosen. Now really the priority on this is to get rid of the chips and the nicks, which really stop play, you know, they show stoppers. Second to that is to obviously make them level enough to play at a decent action, although we're not aiming for ultra low action on an old classic style guitar like this. We do want it lower than it was and lighter and easier to play than it was. And after that, then really the next thing is the final sort of grooves, which we can leave some in, providing they're not notchy. To be honest, the sort of gentle grooves never really completely stopped play on a worn guitar. Oh, it's gone dark. So let me get a tuning. Again, just for the purposes of leveling frets. So I want the neck under tension. Twing. Right, I'm not going to make a judgment on how well this plays in terms of, you know, buzzing frets and whatnot yet, until we've done some leveling, because we've got to do that anyway to get rid of these nicks and scratches in the frets caused by being dropped on its face sometime. So that's the first objective. We've got the nut exactly how I want it. We've got the bone dust on the nostrils, on the sneeze. Morris in attendance, keeping his eye on everything. We've got bone dust covered glazzies. Right, not really tidying up as I go along, but hey, it's my shed. Okay, double check, sanity check. We've got the action we wanted, check. We've got the neck relief we wanted, we checked. We've got the nut set how I wanted, check. We're ready to go with the fret leveling, and I'm going to use once again the set of balls known as, the truss rod known as U-channel, and I'm just going to do the usual thing now. Wow, look, a custom handmade nut from nothing, from out of nothing. A custom nut for an old, not an old guitar, but a classic guitar. It's a short scale, so not as long. Hey, nice. Right, so what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to go into lots of detail about my method. If you're interested, I talk about it in billions of other things, and it's all in my ebook explained, yada 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 yada. No, actually, shouldn't undersell that. It's all explained brilliantly in my ebook, which shows how I do it and why I do it, and so on and so on. So, okay, here's the fun part. Let's go. We begin the scary process of removing fret metal, and what it's going to show us straight away, if we just use a bit of gravity and gently file away, it's going to show us which frets are high for starters. It's going to do that, but it's also going to let us keep a track on if and when we're removing wear on the frets. Now interestingly, straight away it's telling me right here is a high fret. Now that high fret is going to be kind of dictating things here, because I'm not going to get down to the wear in these frets if this thing's high and in the way, but it is. So there's a couple of things going on for me. So first one, I'll do what I usually do, which is to reseat the string and test all the notes, which is great. They all play at a really nice low action. Way. Now the question I have is, are there any niches, nicks and knocks and things in these frets that I still need to fight for? Because if there are, I'm going to have to go below. I'm going to have to take more off this beastie here. Now just looking at it, and I could do a little, I'll use a piece, I'll use Jurgen's V100 truss rod cover. And what I'm looking for here is I'm trying to feel niches. There's not enough fret metal in my judgment on this guitar to make taking out the gentle grooves a priority, because otherwise we'll be down to very little fret metal left, and it's a kind of false economy doing this. You might as well have spent might as well spend a bit more and refret completely, in which case you've got a kind of brand new leaf of life on a guitar. Now I think there's a chip up here, and I'm not going to be able to get that out unless I do a little bit more work, so I'm going to have to do a little bit more work. So you can see my priority is not even the levelness, it's the chips in the frets that are going to be kind of playing showstoppers really. It's what's going to get in the way of somebody enjoying this guitar, particularly if you wanted to invite someone round, prospective buyer, and they come across, yeah, I can see the chips there now. So, and there's one right there too. So we've got a couple of chips that are pretty deep. They're high up on this guitar, so that's a sort of mitigating thing. They're also only at the start of the bend, so you're bending away, but you can feel them. Don't mind that scraping. That's the fact that the frets are a little bit scraped up now with the sandpaper. So got a challenge here with this one. You could argue for just focusing a bit more on the end here, which I'm sort of doing. I'm just looking at this end. Since it's right near the end, we could kind of give it a bit more, almost a bit more attention deliberately to try and get out these frets, and of course it just means they'll be just fractionally lower than everything else in the sequence, which isn't really a problem since they're further down the track. Now I've got rid of one of them mainly, and there's still a little glimmer over there, but this is going to be a little bit of a compromise here. It's not bad. What I can do is I can get as far as I comfortably can go with this, and then I'm going to recalibrate here, and then I can try at the last stitch to attend to it with a bit of sandpaper as we're going through the final polish out. But it's yeah, it's tricky. It's not absolutely ideal, but this is why the fret leveling process, sorry, or I wouldn't say fret leveling, this is why the kind of combination fret leveling stroke fret dressing is a judgment game. You've really got to balance up what you're aiming for and what's possible, and you have to sometimes settle for a compromise. You know, in the longer term, if this was my own guitar, I would have probably refretted, but you know, it adds a load of cost onto a guitar that may not really make the same amount back. The problem with you know, when you take a refret, the refret, my refret price includes the setup afterwards. So let's say it's £175 for that. You get a guitar with a new set of frets and what you know is a new lease of life. But if you are coming to resell it, unless it's a vintage guitar, if you're coming to resell this one, you may not get back your you may not be able to load your 175 quid onto the price to recoup it, simply because the buyer may see a far less played Jaguar for the similar kind of money and not have to not see the additional premium that you have to put on for the money you've spent on the refret. Now I know that the refret gives you a really nice setup. It includes everything I've just done so far and everything we're doing now, but again, it kind of restricts you to selling to somebody who would be otherwise in the market for a setup from me. And that isn't everybody, as simple as that. Now there's a couple of, I'm looking for nicks, there's a couple of nicks still in there. I'm going to do a little bit more in this one. It's kind of tricky. You can see the nicks down there, they're quite deep wear grooves, but again, if they're not sharp and they don't ping the string, then they're not too big a problem. I'm just going to try and get to a point where we can eke out any final little scratches with sandpaper. I think we're very close to it, but it probably won't take another fret leveling after this. It's nice, getting there. Right, recalibrate. I always err on the side of caution anyway, so I tend to back off rather than plough straight on. So there's usually a bit more you can do than I do. I mean, I could go further than I do, is what I'm trying to say. Because the reason I have that caution is because, of course, fret life is the life of the guitar, which is why I love refretting guitars so much, because there's nothing like giving them a new lease of life with a new set of frets. Right. Okay, so we're now coming up on the G track. Again, it's feeling very good at the moment. Everything's doing what it should, and you may have kind of noticed that as I'm using this thing, I stop and I use the first kind of few passes as a diagnostic. And it tells me, you can see the sort of stripes appearing here, and those are dents where the marker pen is seated, sitting, and that tells you where the grooves still are. And as long as you can see that, you know there are grooves there. But like I said, they're of secondary importance to me. The primary importance is the physical chips. Like we've got some here that are going to be quite difficult to get out, because these parts of the frets already appear to be quite low. So I'm gonna need to, I may not get to them. It's as simple as that. It may not be possible to get low enough to bottom out those chips, in which case we have to kind of make a decision. Do we just live with it, or do we try and, if they're right at the end of the fret rack, we could kind of work on them a little bit individually. We might just get away with a bit of last few fret attack, because they're in the at the end of the fret rack, and we could just about get away with it. We shall see. Again, recalibrating now on for the D track. This guitar is the action now is completely transformed from what it was. That's for sure. It's a completely different beast. Hoping with some new strings on it early in the week, it's going to sound completely different too. Also with the pickups moved. I have to, when we get the frets, the strings off to do the final sort of clean up polish on these frets, I'm going to take a look under there and make sure the jack socket is both correctly wired and functional, and there are no sort of loose broken joints, because it sounded a little bit iffy to me. Okay, I've still got a couple of little grooves up here, nicks. We may just get away with it. If they were down here, it would be sort of unplayable, but right at the top here, I'm just going to give them a little bit of a dance up here with the file. I'm kind of concentrating on almost pushing down here a little bit now. But if anything, it's kind of introducing a little bit of a backward fall away, I suppose you could call it in traditional terms, but I'm just trying to get rid of those last glitches rather than have them there. As always, the thing is to check the string. Well, it's playing okay, but there's still probably a little room for a tiny bit more leveling right at that end anyway, so I'm just going to lean on it a little bit this end and let it do a little bit more work here, which in its own way should just help free up a couple of those notes there. This 10th fret is still cutting up pretty heavily, so it shows that it's been the highest of all the frets. It's just one that has never seated properly. And at the kind of high action this thing originally was, you never would have known that. But in order to get down to a more playable action, that's when you kind of run into the effects of the uneven frets. 20 minutes to Blue Planet time. Okay, the relief curve changes across the radius of the neck, you'll be noticing. Hence I do a kind of tweak. Now it's flattened out in this bit. It was a little bit deeper of a curve. So I'm starting to use Americanisms, deeper of a curve. But now it is flattening out. I'm making tiny adjustments to get this back to a good map of the actual curve. Okay, we are there. So little adjustments, and they are microscopic, but they really do make a difference, which is the amazing thing about this method. So here we go. We are in the A track, and just kind of go away at it and then see what the cutting pattern tells us. Kind of what you'd expect, first of all, that fret 10 is still high. There's some low frets over here. Everything else is looking okay, and in fact there's not a lot in here that is grooved, so we don't need to overwork this. I just want to make sure that everything is as even as possible and plays well, but we don't have to chase any notches out of here, which is good. So play all the notes through. Pretty good. Still feel slight notching, but I think there's a tiny bit more. I'm going to do a fraction more in both the B and the G track. Just one more run on each of those before we move to the final E. But beyond that, it's not going to go, and we just have to live with it. The only reason I'm doing this is two things. One is, at the action I've chosen, there's still that tiny, as we're doing a bend, which actually for a 9.5 on as low an action as this is very good anyway. But I'm just going to, since we've got that little, as we bend, I might as well give it another little go here, because we've also got some notching on that particular track, so there's no harm in having a go at getting rid of that while we're at it. So sort of two birds and one stone here. I'm going to move to the G, or recalibrate I should say, and then move to the G, and then we'll go on to the final E, and then we'll be done. It'll be a case of reprofile or reshape. Let's get that in the right place. Reprofile stroke reshape the frets to iron out the flat spots and restructure them into nice arch I should say shapes. So up here we've got the final sort of nicks and chips on these very last frets. I'm sort of really deliberately pushing down on these now. I'm using the sort of tail end of this. I'm still using the shape of the curve, but I'm just putting a bit more welly into this end of it, because there's a particular fret here that's 2 frets or 3 frets that got a bit of a hammering from whatever accident it had. Actually a series of them just there, which unfortunately is the sort of place that most people want to play lead guitar. And but like I say, the only real way around this is a complete refret, which is a big operation. Okay, so we're now for the final E, and back it off, put some more on, back it off, put some on, back it off, back, that's about right. I tend to err ever so slightly on the over curved side, and the reason for that is because it kind of compensates for the slight inconsistency in the mapping of the curve in the first place, but that's another long boring story. So anyway, I'm just going to now run this to the edge and along, and then see what news it's giving me about the condition. Everything, no major scratches, I don't think. So as long as this plays, I'm going to let it off any further attacking. Jobette done. Right, now it gives me great pleasure to remove these strings, and I'm going to go with what we've got, because I don't want to take any more fret metal pursuing what might be an impossible mining expedition to the bottom of those craters. You know, the guitar's had what damage it's had, and there's only as much as you can do, and what we're doing now is it's going to play and feel a million times better, but it's you know, we have to accept that we can't get every single bit of damage out, short of refretting it. So ta-ta, old strings, done your duty, you're out, you're fired. Right, and you can see I'm completely covered in fret dust, and you can see the fret dust built up there. And a bit of tissue paper, and just wipe some of it off. Actually, what I want to do is I'm going to use this stuff instead, which is another kind of naphtha, of which I've got tons, but it's a bit oilier. It takes a bit less oil out of the, it does the same thing I need it to do, but it takes a little bit less oil out of the fingerboard, but it doesn't dry quite as quickly as the other stuff, and it dries with a little bit more oil. But in terms of what it does, it's absolutely very effective. I'm just picking up most of the dust out of this thing. Now I'll get some close-up pictures, because I can see the sort of condition of the frets still. Camera pictures, action. Yeah, so you can still see this. To be honest, this would probably kill these frets off altogether to take all of this wear out of them. And I think that's, you know, that would be a complete refret, which is kind of not what we set out to do. So I mean, the thing is, when they're crowned and polished out, they're going to still look very good, or they'll look pretty good, and look very new, but you know, we're still going to have just a little bit of grit here and there. Like I say, there's no real way around that, short of nuclearing them into non-existence, and that sort of defeats the object. So like I said, it's just a balance, a payoff, trade-off. These frets are not new enough to hammer down to the ground, and the thing is, if I did, they would be completely different feel anyway. It wouldn't feel like anything like the same guitar. So it's sort of, it's a dead loss in a way to go too hard on it. So what I've just done now is, they are jumbo, believe it or not. So I've basically marked them all up again, and now I'm going to just use the StewMac re-crowning file to just pick off the edge of the fret, the squared off edge, and bring it back to as near to a nice arch as possible. And in doing this, you'll pretty much quickly see the pockets of ink marker pen where it's you've got the low spots, and that's sort of how it has to be, really, without killing the entire playability, chasing out, bottoming out. So you can see from this that on any rack of frets, the sort of limiting factor is the lowest fret or the lowest points. So if you have damage like this or significant wear, that sort of starts to dictate what you can and can't do in terms of your action. I fretted when did I do it? Yeah, I refretted my Rally SG, my Rally Les Paul copy the other day, GL400, and foolishly, somewhere in the middle of it, I used a technique I hadn't used before, which was hammering the frets here and there to get them to seat where I wanted them to, and it actually ended up having the effect of pushing a couple of them in lower than the rest, kind of basically flattened them out a little bit, I think. And with the result that I ended up with a couple of flat spots when I came to do my fret leveling that I couldn't really bottom out because it would have cost too much life of all the rest of the new frets. So I just had to live with it, and it ended up being fine. And it didn't stop the guitar playing. What it did is it caused me a tiny bit of buzz when I bent downwards, not bending upwards, but when I bent downwards, kind of doing vibrato. It just zzz a little bit. Because the edge of the fret was hammered flat, and that's also with the bit where you often undercut, and sometimes it makes the fret a little bit thinner than it needs to be, which is okay if you don't hammer it in too hard like I did. Anyway, so you live and learn, and I won't be using that technique again. But okay, so I'm going to stop this process here for the day and force Morris to come inside and watch the TV for a bit, take a break, get something to eat. Now this one's flattened out quite a bit, so you can see I'm having to work fairly hard to round it back off, but it's the last fret in the series, so it's not a big deal. Okay, I will wash off these, clean off these frets one more time, and then I'll take this indoors. So a long old process, as you can see. I don't know how long I've been at this, but it's non-stop. For those who hate my long videos, tough. Yeah, it's non-stop, but this goes to show what it takes to level frets in a way when you're playing off fret life on a guitar versus the objectives of cleaning up serious damage. And this is kind of non-standard. This has been dropped on its face at some point in its life, and the result is that it's it's got nicks into the fretboard, and that's for those of you who buy guitars online. It's one of the things that you can't see in a standard photograph. So I really recommend when you're buying, try to get the seller to take your clear close-up photograph of the frets. Now if they're trying to screw you over with a guitar that's been damaged, they won't they may not photograph the frets with the worst damage on it, or if there is damage like this. But you can get a good idea. If they won't do it, then I say walk away. They obviously won't be wanting to sell it. If they do it and it's blurred, you can't see anything, then they may as well not have done it. So ask again, and if they aren't capable of using their camera in such a way as to get a clear-ish shot so you can ascertain the condition of the frets, then no matter how good it looks, walk away, because the truth is a Fender HH Jaguar with screwed frets is going to leave you 200 quid out of pocket nearly. It's either going to completely dent your ability to sell it again, or it's just going to leave you good and proper out of pocket to get the frets redone. And if you get it done cheaply, you'll save money, but you'll get a cheap fret job. You won't get precision setup probably out of it. And if you want it done properly, you know, it will cost you money for the expertise to get it done in such a way that it keeps the guitar's value. This guitar, clearly just took James a little bit by surprise in terms of its fret condition, and so I'm doing my best now to sort of bring it back into a playable sort of state. It's also got slightly sharp edges here too. Just want to round a couple of those off where it matters on the playing edge. Now the thing about this is if you're doing any setup work, this is a good time to take care of this, because in the next stage tomorrow, when I finish off this process, then we can get sandpaper on all of this and soften up any of these edges. So if I'm leaving behind any scratched edges on these frets by taking any burrs off, then we can soften it all off with various grades of paper tomorrow. This feels okay. Sometimes on a guitar like this, where the frets come right to the end, it doesn't hurt to just roll your thingy over and check that there's nothing sticking up, because if the fingerboard shrinks at all, you tend to get sharp frets sticking out, and it can be really annoying. Right, that's it for today. I'm knackered. Long old process. I will see you tomorrow for the next stage of this, or it might be sometime tomorrow, and then we'll be waiting for tens to fit back on this. Looking at this, there's a couple of spots here that are still going to be, you're going to feel that, but it's going to smooth off quite a bit from here, but it's not going to make it go away without introducing low spots. And just, if you're doing this and if you've leveled frets, you've got to resist the temptation to get stuck in here with a piece of sandpaper, unless you're really sure about what you're doing, because you're going to introduce an uneven or a low spot, which is going to make the next frets choke out, and that's going to actually make it worse of an experience than if you didn't do anything. So I'm going to attempt to just smooth these out in the sanding process without causing any further problems. But you can, it's really taking a bang here. You can absolutely feel this. But it's, like I said, you've got to weigh up the amount of material you're left with. People often say, what's your kind of guide height, and there is no guide height. It depends on the guitar and the player, really, or what you like. But we're not doing badly at the moment. We've got about 1.4. No, not on that one. We haven't. 1.4. 1.07, it varies depending on which trough I'm putting it into. I think on average it's about 1.1, 1 to 1.1. Actually on average it's coming in at about 1.0, so it's a little bit more down this end. Well, I said that, but not there, there isn't. A bit more. Depends if you go right next to the fret or not. So hard to judge with this kind of measuring thing. Kind of go with it. It's going to play very nicely all the way up to about here, and you may just feel a scratch. And the one that's really bothering me is there's two here, only two really that could be a problem, and it's these two. But we shall see what we can do. Later, sticking it out for so long. I'm just going to put a quick bit of video on here. I wouldn't normally do it in this bit. Got some 80s gold or something going on in the background here. Now hopefully we don't get copyright. Anyway, but the point is, the reason I'm putting this on is just to say that this guitar has been a really interesting one. I'll turn the sound off so I don't get a copyright strike against my name, thanks to YouTube and its fabulous algorithms. Anyway, yeah, this one I had to kind of hang back without grinding all of the wear off on this one. So trying to balance retaining as much fret material as possible with getting the bulk of the damage out and making it overall as playable as possible. And I'm just looking at this and I think I'm almost got it right. Very close. So, you know, it's leaving some nicks still in the surface of the frets and some grooves, but then you've got to try and judge it so that you're hoping that this process of sanding will just iron out the final bits. Now there's one, I can see this, I can feel this, there's a little nick down here which actually, you know what, may not even be perceivable when being played, so kind of almost got there. But I've kind of, laboured isn't the right word, I've spent extra time on this sanding process on this one, you know, just because I've got to do a little bit extra work just to get as good as it can be, and it's, you know, it is a really difficult compromise. You know, if you go too far in the first place and then polish out, you end up with a guitar that just feels quite different from what it did before. Now this will, in part because the action is so much nicer than it was before, but you know, you don't want to end up with sort of frets that feel like, I don't know, strips of ribbon, because that really won't feel good for most people anyway. So this is feeling pretty good. So I've taken lots of time. You can see it's quite a good aerobic workout to be doing this for half an hour non-stop. I'm trying to just ensure that the whole, everywhere there was a groove or a nick, I mean, you know, I could feel the tiniest of little depressions here, but they're not going to interfere with play. And that's the objective, is to get a good playing, best possible playing neck out of this for the least destructive work on the frets. But I think this is going to be quite nice. Should be, after all the effort I've put into it. I have to say, you know, a guitar without dings and massive grooves in the frets tends to be a lot easier to do this to. You know, you've just got a straightforward polishing job to do, but this one is a bit of both involved, polishing and kind of cleaning up at the same time. Nearly there. Like I say, it's not really a lot of choice in the matter. It's either compromise or refret, really, or go too low, which I really don't ever want to do. And it's like giving a guitar back that technically has every single little groove taken out of it, but has practically no life left in it, which never feels like a good outcome. So there's the last wipe with 12,000 grit, just the sort of final polish in this deal, and it's looking very nice. So I spent this morning routing Eki timber, which is a great fun for me. So we get some, well, I was flattening it, or thicknessing, more flattening than anything. So I flatten one side, put an initial edge on it, which I'll then fully flatten with a blade, careful work with a blade, and then they will join. This will be a centerpiece for a new guitar. So, and it's as it stands, it's coming in at a grand total 28 millimeters. So this would be probably just about thick enough to do an SG, and have a nice balance of weight. So kind of slightly heavier than, heavier than a standard SG. But I think for a Tele shape, I may be looking at a top to go on top of that. But again, I don't. If I put a top on, I want something very, very light, because the Ecky's so heavy, you run a risk of just overloading it in terms of weight. So it's going to be a bit of kind of try and suck it and see. I mean, I could use some of the. I've got some more Ecky as well, which is going to route down. It was all twisted originally. I got a duff plank. It's not a big problem, so I kind of got it discounted in the end. But I'm going to be sort of thicknessing that down to a workable flatness, which means losing most of its width. So I'm going to end up with some thin boards. But in fact, they would be pretty much the perfect size to put onto the guitar, but it would end up being a 6-piece. What I'd much rather do is have the 3-piece back, which is a fairly nice number, with either a 1-piece top, you know, and I can get some stuff that's quite relatively cheap locally, stuff that I've used before, like Sequoia, which is very pretty to look at, but it's a little bit soft. But what it has as an advantage is it's extremely light because of its slightly softness, and it just means I could have quite a thick layer of that for a top. It ends up looking great, and carries very little weight, so you get back the thickness, you get the sort of the anchoring weight of the Ecky, and then not overburdened by the top. But yes, you know, it is a little bit prone to denting and scratching because of its softness. You know, it's a bit like it's a kind of pine sort of feel. It doesn't look like pine. It's got this beautiful red, streaky figured grain, but kind of soft like pine, I suppose you could say. I do. People use pine for Telecasters all the time, so its softness isn't a barrier to being used. And I could probably I think I could probably find a single piece big enough, but even if it's 2 set against the 3 of the back, it's still a usable construction, or it can be a nice construction. But who knows? I'm just seeing what we've got timber wise first. There's a limit to the thickness of that Ecky anyway. It comes at about maximum about 30 before you even do any flattening. So it always has to be the base to something, or in the case of if it's an SG, it might just about make the SG on its own, without any extra top or anything. But still, we will see. So look, now done in the sanding out process, and I'm just really taking away some of the dust, or the remaining dust, and any pen. And you know, I can see very slight depressions where there's some wear, but it's a flame of a lot better than it was. Like I say, it's a compromise. You just got to grind this thing into the ground. Now, while I'm here, I haven't got the tens to put on this right now, so it's gonna pause for another day or so. But while I'm here, it is a good opportunity to check the jack socket, because it felt like that was loose when I was playing. So I'm going to have a go at that. I suddenly realised I need to put that onto quiet mode, hopefully. Okay, so this is the inner. Somebody said to me, what's the wiring like? And I don't know, but I'm presuming it's fairly standard, but who knows. I'm not really. Okay, that's it looks okay. Huh. What? Now I'm confused. There's no grounding. Unless I've completely lost my mind. Let's look at the. Yeah, we've got. What the. The jack isn't grounded. I'm going to do some research, but I can't see how that is ideal at all. Let's just get my head around this. If the jack isn't grounded, and we've only got a hot, then this whole guitar is not grounded. That's a pretty serious issue, because technically, well, that's very rare. Technically, in not having a ground strikes me as being dangerous. I mean, I don't know a lot about electrics, I have to say, right? And I don't claim, never have claimed to, so there we are. However, what I understand is that in a grounded circuit, an earthed circuit, I'm out of this stuff now. I need to get some more when means allows. Grounded circuit, when you ground something, you connect to the ground outside effectively through the means of the wiring in your house, through the jack plug, or through the amplifier grounding, earthing ideally, which is necessary to keep you safe. That grounding then comes into your guitar via the jack plug, in order to kind of keep you, or keep the guitar grounded, and that the idea is for the, I suppose, for any surge of electricity, correct me if I'm wrong because I told you I don't understand this very well, but it's supposed to ground the guitar so that the electricity doesn't go through you if there's a short circuit or something, or a live, if you touch a live thing accidentally. Now this, I'm just telling you now, there is no way on earth, there is, if your grounding for your guitar comes from the jack socket, from the amp, which is grounded, through the central ground of your, the kind of the lower part of your jack plug, and that goes in there. The tip is the hot bit, which carries the hot signal, and the ground is the sheath around it, or the tunnel it goes into. And this, because there's nothing attached to here, to back to the pots, then in fact there's no ground, there's no grounding between these pots. So there's no grounding between the pots, and there's no, your incoming, I'm going to do it just visually, because this is how it always made sense to me. So this thing is your saviour, because if everything's right, your house is connected to the earth outside, your ring mains or your main circuit, your plug that goes into the wall to plug your amplifier in has a ground peg in it. That ground comes through your amplifier and comes out to the female socket there. The tip of the thing touches the hot signal, it goes to the amplifier part of the amp, and this bit connects your lead to the outside of the house, the ground. And so the ground lead, two wires come through this, the tip, the hot one and the ground one, connect again at the other end to the shaft and the tip, and they come in through here, and the tip comes through, connects to there, that's the hot, which is that one there, so the signal there can go back out to the amp, and this one is the earth one, and that should ground from here to your pots and outwards to the rest of your guitar and everything that needs grounding in your guitar, including you. And it doesn't, there is no ground at all. Now, like I said, I'm not an expert, but to me that looks like a major flaw. What strikes me as strange is that it's not making some massive buzzing noise. I don't know why that isn't the case. But I'm just kind of being logical about this. There is no other way of grounding the parts of this guitar without having a continuous ground connection through the amp back to the earth, the house ground. And since there is nothing on that, that's the entry point for it. There is no other way of grounding it, and there's grounds here from the pickups to the top of here. But what's the point? What are they grounding to? Because there's no follow on through. I want to take a picture of this and put it out on Facebook, because I think this is an interesting problem. And like I say, sorry if I sound thick as two short planks talking about this, but I'm not an expert on electronics at all. But I think this is definitely unright. So let's get a nice shot. We have no wire off the jack, no earths going to the pots. So who alone knows what the heck is supposed to be going on? Although we do have earths going to, well, we have the black earth wires from the pickups going to the top of the volume pot. Sorry, the volume pot. So we've got, yeah, sorry, I'm back to front now, aren't I? Right, I am going to pause this and go and do some research, because that's interesting. It's not right, I'm sure of it, but we shall go and see. See you in a minute. Okay, quick update. Thank you to my internet friends, and thank you to the internet for providing reassurance. This is the way it's meant to be. As any of you watching probably know, but I didn't know, so there you are. This theoretically grounds out on the plate, and I'm just going to double check and make sure everything is that way. But yeah, that's cool. Panic subsiding. So I'm just going to basically make sure it is stiff. To me, I thought it was making a bit of a funny crackle when I was moving it around, but it's still working, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. So apart from putting that back together again, checking it, that's it. The kill switch is gone from here, no longer exists. I'm going to leave this now until the strings arrive, and that's it. So hopefully, I don't know if you can see now, but the frets are looking really great compared to what they were. So hopefully this is going to play and feel great. Pickups are raised up. It's going to be a nice guitar. A bit more overall cleaning to go. There's some years old grime on here, bit of rust on these that's not going to go away, but we're almost there. So thanks for sticking around with this, and thank you again to the Facebook internet friends who came up with sort of thoughts and suggestions and reassurance on how this thing grounds out. Of course, it's a metal plate, so I'll know for next time that's likely to be the way this works, but it's not something I see very often, and I guess as a hard wires sort of person, you get nervous when you don't see a ground lead. Alright, see you a bit later, or a couple of days time, when I come to string this up. Okay, don't look over there, it's a mess. I'm busy, so I'm getting stuck straight into restringing the Jaguar. And then later on today I get to take a break and clear up and rearrange a few things, because when you get busy you sort of leave the tidying bit off to one side. Anyway, what I've got here is I've got me tins for a Jaguar, so after a short interlude the other day to find out about the wiring, the earth function of the control plate, which was interesting to read about and discover. Now I'm ready to restring. I've got nice levelled frets. The vast majority of the wear is removed, in a very slight compromise. So I've got to do this just now. Then I've got to take Morris and his sister to the vet for their injections, and then but the only other thing, well, I've got an acoustic guitar that needs some lacquer spraying. I've got one mine to finish, number 20 over there, which is hanging up. Oakcaster number 20, which is a beautiful looking thing with 3 single coils. I'm very pleased with the outcome of putting a humbucker into my Eki Telecaster shaped thing yesterday. Well, I would have realised, stop making noises. What I realised is I didn't actually know what the humbucker was that I put in there. I thought for a second that it was I had in my mind that it was a Fender, because I was thinking of Murray's Modern Player, but actually I think he'd already changed the humbucker on that. So I think he came down to me with the iron gear humbucker already in, so I don't think I took out his Fender, if you see what I mean. So I guess it was some unknown thing. Anyway, it's gone in there. It's a little bit less output than the P90, so they're a little bit mismatched, but that could well be because the P90 is in the right position, close enough to the strings, and due to the slightly short excuse me, short screws that I had available, the humbucker is a little bit lower down physically, so I've got some screws coming. In fact, I'm going to use some black P90 screws to lift up the humbucker a bit further. I mean, I could find some foam and do it that way, but anyway, with this, what I'm doing is, with these split post tuners, my method is to line them up and go two tuners past the tuner I'm doing, and then wind only that much on, which is kind of how I've always done it. But this, it puts a sort of minimum of string onto the post, really, or a relatively small amount. But I've always liked these split post tuners. They seem to be almost without fail effective and very good, very direct and very good at holding tune. I think one of the reasons why, and I never really understood this, I suppose, until recently, what I was aware of was when I had my JV made in Japan Squire, when I bought it new back in 1983, spring of 83, and I had that guitar, and all the years I had it, I was amazed at how completely reliably it held tune. Now it might be because I may have been very good by habit at wringing out the slack, the excess slack in the strings. But I also think there is something about these split post tuners, a characteristic of them, that make them unusually good for holding tune. And the thing is, if you think about it, there really is, well, no, I was going to say there's a limit how much you can put, as much on the post as you want, but maybe from early on I had a habit of cutting only an inch or so past of excess string past the slot or the split in the tuner. So maybe just so happened I never was tempted to wind on too much string, but I don't know why. I don't know if that's the actual explanation. Okay, so the strings are on, the leftover bits are here, and what I'm going to do now is just do my usual thing of stretching out these strings. Like I said, or like we saw, the nut on this is a custom cut one, which is always difficult to do. I find anyway, unless I have some sort of, I don't have, what could I have that work? I suppose I could have some sort of template even. Would that work? Can't see it really. You've got to cut, each thing has got to go from a centre line, and then you've got to cut outwards equally either side. So the issue is the space between strings the space between strings, or is it the space between centre points? Because the fatter the string gets, the less it's going to be equal all the way across. I don't know exactly. I've never thought it all the way through. Nice. Okay, so now I'm going to stretch them all again. Of course, the one to watch out for is the top E usually. That's the one that breaks, if any, while you're doing this sort of stretching. I'm trying to stretch either side of the bridge and the nut to get rid of as much of the slack as possible, but hopefully without stressing the string around the nut or the bridge saddle, if possible. Kind of difficult to do, especially when you go over the top of a tunematic bridge with a knife edge or a sharp saddle top. There is quite a lot of chance of breaking strings when you're doing stretching in that sort of context. But especially these bits up here, I mean, they're way long. So I tend to do some pullings, some bendings, and hopings, and do some breakings. Tunematic bridge on a Fender. What are you playing at? Well, not tunematic, but near enough. Tiny raise, fractional raise in the bridge. Coming up, let me find a suitable. Thank you. Is that the right one? No. Find a suitable screwdriver head to do it. That'll do. Just going to go up a smidgen. Quarter of a turn, that's all. Now, I'm hearing creaking over those damn stupid string trees, but that's about it, and that's what you always get on those metal butterfly things. So, well, sorry, one string tree. So I would heartily recommend Ukes. I think I was gonna change it for James, but there's no point going away from standard if he's going to sell this some point soon. It just means it makes more effort to have to change it back. Okay, so here we have playing nicely. So what I want now is a strap, a lead, an amp and a tuner. And I'm just going to get this. No, that's an XLR jack. There's one. Just going to intonate this. Just check it as we go. Wood chips everywhere because I've been making like crazy. I mean, that's the great thing about getting untidy, is it's always a sign of being busy and doing lots of stuff, which I enjoy, of course. So these straps are free with the rotor sound strings, so I never 100% trust them. It's just that they're not 100% trustworthy. I don't know. They're fine, but they're I wouldn't want to. I never trust a customer's guitar on a strap unless it's got a strap lock. I'm always kind of assuming it's going to fall off, which is probably just as well, really. Okay. Doing this audibly, often I would do this with the Korg tuner, but I haven't got it here, so I'm just going to go with standard turn, middle, middle, middle. Bridge pickup. It's on, that's good. You hear seagulls outside. bit long. Watching the time. Am I watching the time? No, yeah. Oh, I've got 15 minutes. Da, da, da. Right, this one's a little bit long, so I'm going to bring this one closer to the front, aka shorten it slightly. It's just very difficult to turn. They always are. There you go. Pretty close. Single, I think. Let us just put in the tremolo a second and see. Put in the tremolo a second and see how it affects things. Listening for pings through the nut really more than anything else to hear it go out of tune. So you can hear it going through the string tree. Horrible. See, I can't, it's one of those things I can't really guarantee stable tuning with those horrible butterfly metal clips in place. You know, I would recommend switching it. It takes it away from the standard, obviously. D. I'm thinking that the D might need a bit of sandpaper in the slot, just a little bit. Just what I'm doing here is I'm just taking the strings out of the string tree to listen for pings and creaks. A bit down here, there might be a tiny bit on the D here. Take care of those a second, just give each one a little go just to make sure. And then the only thing I can do for this stuff is I can put a little bit of I can use a little bit of, I'll get the word out, grease or something, just to kind of dampen the thing on the string tree. Or the other thing I could do is, just for now, since I'm bringing this back to James like today and I give him both parts, if I take off this string tree and put a tusk one on. Now, just to state, the one I'm talking about is a homemade tusk one. So let's get this horrible metal thing off. You can always put it back on in a fraction of a second, but they really are grim. Let's use the screw. We'll just put on top of this my homemade tusk tree in the same hole using the same screw. And it's actually not a bad looking thing for a homemade, for not a lot of money. Let's pull that down onto there for now. See how it gets on. Where's that sitting? Okay, different pressure, so it's going to line up in a minute. Okay, so while I'm at it, I'm going to start with the D. I'm pretty sure there's a slight bit of sticking going on in there. So I use a fine edge of a blade and I use a bit of 600 grit. I'm just going to widen the slot a tiny fraction. I'm just listening out now for any twings, twangs, pings and pongs. This one, it's interesting, it doesn't sit evenly, I don't know why, but what is that? Is that the way I've cut it? The way it's sitting in the thing. Lift it up, lift it up, come on. Let's try it. Okay. Good. We've lost the pinging now from that horrible string tree. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to find my stuff. I always recommend that when you use graphite in the slots, don't use graphite until you've completely cured the pinging by using first the nut slots the way you cut them, secondly to make sure you've used any sandpaper necessary to get rid of any pinging that you pick up, which I just did. And then now, once you're absolutely clear of that, well, only when you're clear of that, then add some graphite as a sort of finishing touch. But it really, I keep stressing that if you try to use it as a fix to pinging slots, you'll just get tuning problems. It won't work, it'll wear out eventually, and you might lubricate for a little bit, but you'll eventually end up with the same problem again. So there's no substitute for getting the slots right in the first place. But as a sort of, icing on the cake thing, then stick a bit of graphite in there, just for good measure. But I can't stress how awful those metal butterflies string trees are. They just, I don't rate the Chinese roller ones either. Because as soon as you've got a lot of force of metal against metal, you always get some sort of hot spot occurring. Right, that is just about as good as it's going to get, I think. Holding straps, checking straps. Everything's still probably got a bit of slack in it if you've undone the strings again a little bit. And I've lost my plectrum somehow or why. Nice, isn't it? Neck only. Bridge. There we go, Jaguar Fender. This was 2007 or something, I can't remember. With a temporary homemade tusk string tree, but buy one or whatever. Or keep this one on if you're keeping the guitar. But there we are. Nice, I like it. All pings cured. Found the plectrum finally. Intonation done. Tiny little tweak needed there, but that was it. This is going back in the box. James is coming this afternoon to pick it up, so thank you for spending loads of time on this. Again, the real-time consumer on this is the custom cut nut to replace the broken original one. Hard to do and get as close as it is to this. It's never 100% perfect in my book. I'd rather not do it because it is a labour of love, but you get there in the end. Yeah. You can hear that to completely fix that pinging, horrible tuning problem. A little bit of widening of the slots, tiny bit on the D, but removing this butterfly thing is the main deal. So I'm going to put this in a little baggie or something and give it to James when he comes round, and that's the job done. See you again for another guitar soon.